My brother's text arrived at 6:14 in the evening, wedged between a grocery list and a meme. Found Mama Place. Meadowbrook. Move-ins the 14th. We've got it handled. I read it twice, waiting for the part where someone asked me anything. There wasn't one. I was standing in my kitchen with a glass of water halfway to my mouth, and I remember thinking, that's it? 8 years of Sunday visits, hospital forms, medication schedules, and my brother sends me a decision like he's confirming a dinner reservation. I didn't call him. I didn't respond for almost an hour. When I finally did, I typed 4 words. Can we talk first? He replied in under a minute. Nothing to talk about. We've got it handled. I set the phone down on the counter, and for reasons I couldn't fully explain yet, I wasn't angry. I was almost calm, because my brother didn't know something. He didn't know that 3 years earlier, sitting in this same kitchen, our mother had made a decision of her own, one she never mentioned to him, and one that was about to make, "We've got it handled," a much more complicated sentence than he realized. My name is Renner. I'm the middle of 3. And this is the story of the week my family learned that being the quiet one in the room was never the same thing as being the powerless one. I should tell you what I do for a living because it matters later, though not in the way you'd expect from a story like this. I investigate insurance claims. Mostly property damage, some liability. What that actually means, day to day, is that I read documents other people skim. I notice when 2 numbers that are supposed to match don't. I've built a career out of being the person who asks one more question before everyone else is ready to close the file. I don't say that to sound impressive. It's a fairly unglamorous job most days. But it's the same instinct I brought to my mother's care for the better part of a decade, and it's the instinct nobody in my family ever seemed to notice I was using. My father died 8 years ago. Slowly, a long decline that took almost 2 years from the first diagnosis to the last week in hospice. During that time, I was the one who filled out the forms, sat through the care conferences, learned the names of his medications and what they were supposed to do, and what it meant when they stopped doing it. Derek called every few days and made decisions from wherever he happened to be that week. He's an area manager for a regional supply company, always traveling, always sure of himself in that particular way people are sure of themselves when certainty is easier than sitting with a hard thing. I remember one week near the end. My father had a bad night, and Derek called at midnight to ask if we should just go ahead and change his care plan, as if that were a decision you could make from 400 miles away over a bad phone connection. I told him we should wait for the doctor in the morning. He said fine, but he said it the way you say fine when you've already decided you were right. Paige lived 3 states away and came when she could, which wasn't often, and cried more than any of us, and I never once resented her for that. Someone has to be the one who cries. Someone has to be the one who calls the pharmacy at 8 in the morning to ask why the refill didn't go through. Somehow, I always ended up being the second one. I remember one specific night near the very end, when the hospice nurse pulled me aside to say it would probably be soon, maybe days, and I called Derek to tell him. He went quiet on the phone in a way I'd never heard from him before or since. No plan, no next step, nothing to manage. I don't know what to do with that, he said, and I understood even then that he meant it literally. Derek has never been good at the parts of life that don't have a next action attached to them. He flew in 2 days later, sat by the bed for 6 hours straight without saying much of anything, and left for the airport before it happened, because work needed him back. I've never brought that up to him, not once in 8 years, and I'm not bringing it up now to make him look bad. I bring it up because I think that week is where his fear actually started. The fear of being in a room when something happens that he can't fix, can't schedule, can't handle his way out of. I think losing Dad without ever really being present for it left him terrified of losing anyone else the same way. And I think, without ever saying so to himself, handling Mom's care quickly was his way of making sure he'd never have to stand in that kind of helpless room again. Nobody sat me down afterward and said thank you. I don't think anyone thought there was anything to thank me for. I was just being Renner. Steady. Handling it. It never occurred to me until much later that handling it and being trusted with it were not the same thing, and that my family had quietly decided I was good at the first without ever really considering the second. I'm telling you this because it's the reason I wasn't surprised by Derek's text. I was hurt in a low, familiar way, The way you're hurt by something that's happened before. But underneath the hurt, there was something else. Because 3 years ago, something had changed. And Derek didn't know it yet. I'll get to that. But first, I want to tell you about the afternoon it actually happened because I've never told anyone the whole of it, and it matters more than I understood at the time. It was a Thursday, about 8 months after we buried my father. My mother called and asked if I could come by after work. Nothing urgent, just something she wanted to go over. I remember being mildly annoyed because I'd had a long day and I assumed it was something about the house, a light fixture or a leaking faucet, the kind of small thing that had started falling to me by default. She had a manila folder on the kitchen table when I got there. Inside it was a single form from her doctor's office, mostly blank, with a line at the bottom for a name. "I want you to be the one," she said, sliding it toward me. "For medical things. If I can't decide for myself." I asked her why me and not Derek since he was the oldest, since that seemed to be how these things usually went in families like ours. She thought about it for a moment, the way she thinks about most things, unhurried, like the question deserved more than a quick answer, just because it had been asked quickly. "You're good at this kind of thing," she said. Which was true, but I could tell, even then, it wasn't the whole answer. I didn't push for the rest of it. I signed where she pointed, and she folded the form back into the envelope, and we didn't talk about it again for 3 years. I didn't tell Derek. I didn't tell Paige. It wasn't a secret, exactly. It just never came up, the way a spare key you keep in a drawer never comes up until the day the lock changes. What happened after that first text, though, didn't stop there. The next morning, I called him. Not to argue. I told him I just wanted to see the facility myself before anything was finalized. He said there was nothing to see. He and Paige had already toured it. It was clean, it had a decent rating online, and the price was reasonable given what else was available. When I asked what available meant, exactly how many places they'd actually compared it to, he said he didn't have time to walk me through the whole search over the phone. That was Derek's way of ending most conversations. Not rudely, exactly. He just moved past you, the way you'd move past a stalled car on the shoulder of the highway, with a kind of practiced, mild impatience, as if slowing down for it would cost him something he couldn't spare. I let the conversation go. I didn't let the actual question go. That evening, I looked up Meadowbrook myself. It took about 20 minutes to find the facilities page on the state's long-term care licensing site, the same kind of public database I use at work more often than most people realize exists. Most people never think to look. I did because it's what I do. The overall rating was fine. Nothing alarming. But 3 pages into the inspection history, there it was, a citation from 8 months earlier for insufficient nursing staff coverage during 2 consecutive overnight shifts. The facility had submitted a corrective action plan. The state had accepted it. As far as I could tell, nobody had followed up publicly since. I want to be honest, it wasn't the kind of thing that makes headlines. It wasn't a 5-alarm fire. But it was the kind of thing I would never let pass without one more question, in my job or anywhere else. And my mother was supposed to be living there in 9 days. I called Derek the next morning and told him what I'd found. I kept it factual. I read him the exact language from the citation. I didn't accuse him of anything, and I didn't tell him to stop the move. I just said I thought it was worth a phone call to the facility to ask what had changed since. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Renner, if you go looking hard enough, every place has something. You could probably find a citation on a 5-star hotel if you tried." "Maybe," I said. "I'd still want to know what it says." "I'll mention it," he said, which is a sentence I've learned over many years, tends to mean almost nothing. Paige texted me that night. "Derek said you found something about Meadowbrook? Should we be worried?" I told her the truth, that I didn't know yet, that it was worth asking about, that I wasn't trying to blow anything up. She wrote back, "He probably has it covered. He's usually pretty thorough." I didn't answer that one. There wasn't anything I could say that wouldn't have sounded bitter, and I wasn't ready to sound bitter yet. The days after that were quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like waiting. I went to work. I sat across from a man one Tuesday who swore his water heater had failed on its own, no warning, nothing he could have caught, and I found the manufacturer's recall notice in about 4 minutes because I know where to look and most people don't. My colleague Marisol, who sits 2 desks over, leaned back in her chair afterward and said, You always find the thing nobody else looks for. I told her it wasn't a talent, just a habit, the same 4 or 5 questions applied over and over until something answered them. She said that was probably what a talent was if you looked at it long enough. I laughed it off at the time. I remember it now because I didn't think, driving home, to apply it to my own family, that the exact habit people paid me for at work was the same one nobody at home had ever thought to notice, let alone value. 3 days after that, on a Tuesday, I was at my own kitchen table finishing lunch when Derek called, and I could tell from the first word that something had thrown him. Did you set something up with Meadowbrook?
No, hello.
Set what up? They called me. The intake coordinator said she needed to confirm who the designated healthcare decision maker was going to be for the paperwork. I told her it was me. Obviously, I'm the one who's been handling the whole thing. Okay, I said, because I still didn't understand where this was going. She said their system already had someone else listed, not me. For a second, I didn't say anything because I was doing the math faster than I wanted to admit to myself, and the math only worked one way. Who? I asked, even though I already suspected. She wouldn't tell me over the phone. Privacy thing. Said whoever's listed has to confirm it themselves. A pause. Renner, did you do something? No, I said, which was true. I hadn't done anything recently. What I'd done 3 years earlier, in this same kitchen, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, when my mother had asked me to sit down because she wanted to talk about something. Then who is it? Derek said again, and underneath the confusion, I could hear something sharper starting. Suspicion, maybe. Or fear dressed up as suspicion, which in my brother usually looks the same. I think it might be me, I said. The silence on the other end went on long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. I told him the truth as plainly as I could, that 3 years earlier, after Dad died, Mom had asked me to be her healthcare power of attorney. That I hadn't sought it out. That I hadn't told him or Paige because Mom had asked me not to make a thing of it, and because, honestly, it had never come up in any way that mattered until now. He didn't quite believe that last part. Or he believed it and didn't like it, which in Derek can look identical to disbelief. So this whole time, he said, you've had what, final say? And you never mentioned it. It's not final say over everything. It's medical decisions. And it never came up because there was nothing to decide. Until now. That doesn't feel like nothing, Renner. I didn't argue with him about how it felt. I understood in a distant way why it would feel like something had been kept from him, even though nothing had actually been taken from him. He'd simply never had it to lose. 2 days later, he drove out to see Mom on his own, without telling me first. I only know what happened because she told me herself, that same evening, over the phone, in the plain, unhurried way she tells most things. Derek brought some papers, she said. He wanted me to sign something that would put him in charge of my medical decisions instead of you. My stomach did something complicated. What did you say? I told him no. A pause. He asked me why. I told him the truth. I said, you'd have moved me into that place already, without asking me a single question about it. She asked me what I wanted first. I sat with that for a moment before I trusted myself to respond. How did he take it? About how you'd expect, she said, which for my mother is not a small amount of information. He said I was being stubborn. I told him I'd rather be stubborn than moved somewhere I didn't choose. I asked her, gently, if she was all right. She said she was tired of being talked about like she wasn't in the room, but otherwise fine, and that Derek had left frustrated but not unkind. That was important to her, I think, that even in the middle of this, she still saw him as her son trying to do something right, badly. He kept saying I'd be safer there, she told me. I told him safe isn't the only thing I still get a say in. I asked her if she wanted me to talk to him. She said no, not yet, that some things a mother has to say herself or they don't count the same way. I didn't argue with that either. There's a kind of authority in her that none of us ever quite outgrow being careful around, even now, even with everything else that's changed. A few days after that, Paige called. Not to argue about the facility, exactly. She started the way she often starts difficult conversations, sideways. Derek's pretty upset, she said. I know. He feels like you went around him. I didn't go around anyone, Paige. Mom made a decision 3 years ago. I didn't ask for it. I know. It's just, she stopped. Started again. Could you maybe just let him have this one? He's tried so hard with all of this. Let him have what, exactly? The facility with the staffing citation nobody's followed up on. That's not. Another stop. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the particular kind of breathing people do when they're deciding whether to say something true. I just needed this to be the one thing I actually helped with, she said finally, quieter than anything else she'd said. I wasn't there for Dad. Not really. I'm not here now either, not the way you two are. This was supposed to be mine. Something I did. I didn't say anything right away. I understood the shape of what she was describing, even if I didn't agree with the conclusion she'd drawn from it. It still can be, I said. Just not like this. She didn't answer that. But she didn't push again either, and for Paige, that was its own kind of answer. I want to be clear about something because it would have been easy to do differently. Once I knew what I actually held, the authority on paper, to simply say no and let that be the end of it, some part of me considered doing exactly that. It would have been faster. It might even have been justified. I didn't because I didn't want to win an argument with my family. I wanted them to understand why the argument existed in the first place. So instead, I called Meadowbrook and asked for a meeting, Derek, Paige, and me, together with the program director, to talk specifically about the citation and what had actually been done since. Derek agreed, mostly, I think, because refusing would have looked worse than showing up. The director was a tired, competent-looking woman named Ann Castellano, who didn't try to minimize anything. She confirmed the citation was real, confirmed the corrective plan had been implemented, additional per diem staff on overnight shifts, revised scheduling software, and confirmed, when I asked directly, that there had been 2 more short-staffed nights in the 5 months since, both flagged internally, neither reported externally because they'd fallen just under the threshold that required it. Derek's jaw did something I recognized. Not quite anger, more like a door closing. So it's fine, he said. Technically, and said carefully, it's within the range we're required to disclose. I understand if that's not reassuring on its own. In the car afterward, Derek was quiet for most of the ride. Then he said, we already put down the deposit. Non-refundable after the 16th. That's not the question, I said. It's part of the question. It's the cheapest part of the question. He didn't answer that, and I let the silence sit, because I'd said the truest thing I had, and I didn't have anything to add to it. Paige called me 2 nights later than she usually calls. I read the whole citation, she said. The actual document. Not just what Derek summarized for me. And it's not nothing, she said. I don't know why I let him tell me it was nothing. I didn't say anything triumphant. There wasn't anything triumphant to say. I just told her I was glad she'd looked at it herself, and I meant it plainly, without any edge underneath. I asked everyone to come to Mom's apartment the following Saturday. Not a restaurant, not neutral ground, her home, her kitchen table, because whatever we decided, it needed to happen somewhere that still belonged to her. Before anyone arrived, I laid 3 things out on the table. The citation printout, the relevant section circled, and Castellano's written summary from our meeting, which she'd sent over without my asking, the kind of thing a person does when they want a record to exist. And a small, folded piece of paper I'd kept in the same drawer for 3 years, its creases gone soft from more handling than I'd ever told anyone about. Derek noticed it before anyone else did. What's that? I'll get to it, I said. Mom sat at the head of the table, the way she always had, even now, even in an apartment that was smaller than the kitchen she used to preside over. Paige sat across from Derek instead of next to him, which I noticed and didn't mention. Nobody had brought coffee. Nobody had thought to. We went through the practical part first because it was easier and because I think everyone needed somewhere to start that didn't require looking directly at each other. I explained plainly what the POA was and wasn't. Not control over her finances. Not authority over her day-to-day life. Just the narrow, specific responsibility of making medical decisions on her behalf if she ever couldn't make them herself. A responsibility she'd handed to me 3 years earlier, on an afternoon none of them had known about. Why didn't you tell us? Paige asked, not accusing, genuinely asking. Because Mom asked me not to make it a thing, I said. And because there was nothing to tell. It wasn't a decision I was using. It was just sitting there in case. Derek was looking at the folded paper again. And that, I looked at my mother. She nodded once, so small I almost missed it. I unfolded the note. The paper had gone soft the way paper does when it's been handled a lot, though I don't think I'd actually taken it out more than a handful of times in 3 years. Mostly I'd just known it was there. I read it the way she'd written it. Plain, a little uneven near the end, the handwriting of someone who wasn't trying to write something important, just trying to write something true. Renner, I'm putting your name on the medical form today. I don't want you to make a big deal of it, and I don't want you to tell your brother and sister unless you have to. I picked you because when your father was sick, you were the only one who kept asking me what I wanted instead of telling me what made sense. Derek always knows what makes sense. Paige always feels too much to ask. You just ask. That's all I need. Love, Mom. Nobody said anything for a moment. Outside, somewhere down the hall, I could hear a television playing too loud in another apartment, the ordinary sound of an ordinary Saturday continuing on without us. Paige had her hand over her mouth. Not crying exactly, just still. Mom was looking at her own hands on the table, not at any of us, the way people do when they've said something and don't need to watch it land. Derek was the one who finally spoke, and his voice had lost the edge it usually carried. I should have asked you, he said. Both times. The facility. And he didn't finish the second part, but I understood he meant further back than Meadowbrook. Maybe all the way back. He looked at the note again, then at me, and I watched him try to get to the next thing he wanted to say and fail. I don't get why she picked you over me, he said. I was the one who, he stopped. I don't think he had a way to finish that sentence that didn't sound like something he didn't actually want to say out loud. Then, quieter, almost to himself, I thought handling it was the same as helping. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain the difference, even though I could have, even though some part of me wanted to. It felt more honest to let him sit with it exactly as far as he'd gotten. I know, I said. That was all. It was Paige, a moment later, who said the thing that actually moved us forward. We should look at other places. Not just because of the citation. Because we should all be part of choosing, this time. Derek didn't argue. I think right then he didn't have the energy to. It took another 2 weeks to find somewhere else, a smaller place, 20 minutes further out, with a waitlist we got onto because Castellano, of all people, made a call on our behalf once she understood why we were looking elsewhere. I asked her once why she'd gone out of her way like that for a family that wasn't even choosing her facility, and she just said, most families never come back to ask the second question. It's usually worth helping the ones who do. Derek came to the tour. He asked questions this time instead of announcing conclusions, about staffing ratios, about the overnight coverage specifically, the exact thing he'd once told me not to worry about. At one point the administrator mentioned their corrective action history, unprompted, clearly used to being asked, and Derek wrote something down on the back of the folder they'd handed him. I don't know what he wrote. I didn't ask. It felt like the kind of thing that belonged to him now, not something I needed to collect. Paige flew in for it, which she hadn't originally planned to do, and stayed an extra 2 days afterward, which she also hadn't planned. On the second day, she and I sat on Mom's old porch steps while Mom napped, and Paige said out of nowhere, I think I've spent so long feeling guilty about not being here that I never actually asked what being here would even look like. I just assumed it meant doing whatever Derek said fast so it would count as something. I told her I understood that better than she probably realized. She asked if we were okay. I said we'd always been okay, just quiet about different things at different times, and she seemed to sit easier with that than I expected. My mother moved in on a Tuesday in early spring. Derek carried boxes up 2 flights because the elevator was slow and didn't complain about it once. Paige unpacked the kitchen items into cabinets my mother could actually reach without stretching, asking her, item by item, where she wanted things. I filled out the forms, because that part, at least, had always been mine and nobody suggested otherwise. A few weeks after she'd settled in, I was sitting with her in her new, smaller kitchen and she said out of nowhere, the way she says most important things, Your brother texted me last week. Said he was glad we found this place instead of the other one. That's something, I said. It's not everything, she said, but it's something. I think about that a lot still, about the difference between everything and something and how much of family life actually happens in that gap. Derek never did fully explain, to me or maybe to himself, why she'd chosen me. I don't think he needed to understand it completely for things to be better between us. He understood enough that he'd been wrong about the facility, wrong about the deposit mattering more than the concern, wrong, in some smaller way, about what handling a problem actually requires. The rest, the deeper part, he carried around unfinished, the way most of us carry around the things we almost understand about ourselves. My brother's first text, all those weeks ago, said we've got it handled. I think about that phrase sometimes and about how much work those 4 words were doing, how much they assumed, how little they actually asked. We do have it handled now. All 3 of us. Just not the way he meant it back in June, and not because anyone won anything. Being the calm one in the room was never the same thing as being the powerless one. I'd known that for a long time, quietly, without ever needing anyone else to agree with me. My mother had known it longer than I had.